somebody's asking in the chat, is this a sporting director conversation? I think the sporting director thing has been discussed a lot. I think ultimately what we have is that Zidane, the coach, needs to be a sporting director at a club like Real Madrid. I think a sporting director makes sense at a club like Roma or Sevilla, where you need someone, like there's so much turnover in squad and managers that you need to always make sure that your identity is always on point. You know exactly what kind of manager you want. At a club like that, it makes sense. At a club like Real Madrid, that's the irony, is that it's extra tricky to do it at a club like Real Madrid because there is so much turnover. You need basically your coach to be the sporting director. You need to trust him with the signings. You need to let him build the team. The problem is you never actually let him build his team, and that's the issue. I mean, Zidane is the one that's outlasted this the most out of everyone. Mourinho coming a close second. But even with Zidane, you know, he's been. I mean, it's been reported that he hasn't had full control over the signings, right? And so that's one side of the coin. I will push back. I think like what Odegaard is now has existed at Real Madrid in recent years in the form of Isco to an extent. Isco, pretty good off-ball IQ, vertical outlet, positioning between the lines, can play in the diamond role, can play on the wing, can play down the middle. Odegaard is an inverted version of that. Doesn't probably detract defensively as well as Isco does, but that role can exist. I also think like this idea that Odegaard was given a chance at Real Madrid and it didn't work. I always struggled seeing eye to eye with that because I don't know if we're watching different games. If you watch all those Odegaard games, sure, it wasn't his Real Sociedad best, but it also wasn't as bad as we made it out to be. His positioning between the lines in all those games was good. He was helping us progress the ball. He connected well with Toni Kroos. I was more than okay with his cameos with us. I also think, if I had to guess, and like there's this whole discussion about Borja Mayoral, or sorry, not Borja Mayoral. He's in my head. Kylian Mbappe, Erling Haaland, totally different side of the spectrum than Borja Mayoral. A lot of discussion on them, like can we buy them, and like the financial gymnastics involved in signing players like that. I think that's a whole different discussion that we'll just be talking about almost daily for the next few months. I'm sure there is a world where maybe you can sign one of them. Raiola came out and said the other day that Real Madrid can afford Erling Haaland. Who am I to believe anything that comes out of that man's mouth? But
which he has to say, right, to put his client in the best bargaining position possible. Why on earth would you admit that someone can't afford you? Anyway,
exactly.
Go ahead.
Exactly. No, and that's the thing. So like whether we end up with one of those players, I mean that'd be great. Whether we end up with one of those players or not, I'm not sure. But there are realistic little tweaks you can make to the current squad that do not cost money. Let's be real. If Zidane really wants to give Benzema more rest and he doesn't want to change the way he plays completely with while benching him or giving him rest, then just sell Mariano and Jovic, let Jovic stay at Frankfurt or go wherever else, and bring back Borja Mayoral. Mayoral is just stylistically the closest thing we have to Benzema, and he's from the youth team. Bring him back. That doesn't involve a huge signing fee,
and he's been good. He's actually been good.
He's been good, yeah. He's been legitimately good at Roma.
The sporting director discussion too, like where Zidane giving him authority in the summer, Zidane wanted Mayoral, not Jovic, and we decided no, Jovic is the better player. Right. We want you to keep Jovic, and he wanted Mayoral. So just give him who he wants. If we're gonna go this route, just give him who he wants. Like even if the club, fans, everyone thinks another player is better, it doesn't matter. It's what Zidane wants at this point.
Right, and that's the thing, right? I would personally go in a different direction, but you can't have it both ways, right? Like we're trying to have it both ways. Choose one direction, go it. And this is what I'm saying, right? If you want these players, then sack Zidane. And I'm not saying that's what you should do, but if you want to choose the players, then find a manager who's a better fit for them. But if you want to stick with Zidane, then buy into his vision, right? And so this is why it's tricky, right? Because it's not just about the failures of one person. There's some collective issues going on here, and there's a disconnect between what Zidane wants and what the people at the top want. I agree with you in terms of Mayoral, and then I've always been a little lower on Brahim, but I've been impressed with what he's done in Serie A. I know Matt really loves him. I think, and this is what I was not sure about with him, because this is a very Manchester City thing. And at Man City, he had good shot locations. He got in the box, and he was valuable there. But all Manchester City wingers do that, right? The fact that he's still been able to do that at Serie A, maybe not to the same extent, but he has good box movement in addition to being, I think, an improved 1-versus-1 threat, right? I think he's got a little cleaner, bit better decision-making than he had in earlier years, right? To me, I don't understand why he wouldn't be a Zinedine Zidane player, right? Like, we have options. And we could definitely use him, right? Like, why are we persisting necessarily with Asensio out on the right? Like, I feel like Brahim can give you what Lucas Vazquez does, except to a more offensive tilt. And he gives you shots as well, which is what we lack across the entire front line. He has good late post runs, right? Like, there are options there. And it's about being very clear about, like, just being honest, right? If Zidane says, this is who I don't give it to him, right? But I think there are players, okay, we can argue about Odegaard, we can argue about Jovic, but to me, someone like Brahim, who, again, I've been pretty skeptical on, I don't see why he wouldn't fit in this side. I don't see why he wouldn't be a useful option. And I think he would improve us on the margins enough that I think he would really consider bringing him back on loan. I'm sure Matt has more to say about that as the leader of the Brahim Diaz fan club.
Lucas is on it too. Lucas is in the passenger seat.
All right, there we go. It keeps muting and unmuting me. But I was saying, yeah, I think Lucas is the bigger Brahim fan. I like Brahim. I think he's a player that is kind of different to the profile we have in terms of wingers. And even, I mean, he's been playing primarily as a number 10 actually for AC Milan. But like that even got me thinking, like Odegaard, Brahim, even Reinier Jesus, like these are kids you invested in. They're all number 10s. Like, are we going to change the system to accommodate them? Like, I guess that's again, it gets back to this same point we're making. Like, pick which way you want to go. Do you want to go with this youth, counting on these youth revolution and kind of a more transition team and shaping your system around some of these young players? Or do you want to keep with what you have, bring in some more ready to go players, bring in who Zidane wants? Maybe that's Borja Mayoral, maybe that's someone else, and you go with that. But like, we got to pick one either way.
So
here's to the sporting director.
Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to add a sporting director point. So I think it actually would be helpful. I think it's much more difficult at a club like Real Madrid. But for example, Liverpool, they have a very clear structure, right? Like Jurgen Klopp will give his input, but they have a whole analytics team that informs the decisions about who the sporting director will then go out to sign, right? Like Liverpool have done this better than any club in the world, and Man City recently have like gotten on top of that and kind of matched Liverpool. There's actually, I think, an Athletic article about the whole like arms race between them from an analytics perspective between the two. There's like a very clear structure, right? And it requires the coach buying into it as well, but Jurgen Klopp has, right? There's also a good article an Athletic article, I think, about Jurgen Klopp in this and how he was very skeptical, right, of what's this XG nonsense and stuff. And when an analyst came to him, right, and showed him from actually his Dortmund days, if you guys remember his final season with Dortmund, the league campaign was a disaster, right? Injuries, everything. But from an underlying numbers perspective, Dortmund were actually much better than the results. And so when the guy showed that stuff to Klopp was impressed. And he's like, did you watch the games? And he's like, no, I didn't watch the games. Like the cliche of watching it on a spreadsheet. And so Klopp started to actually trust that a bit more. And you have a structure at Liverpool right now where Jurgen Klopp has an extremely well-defined system of playing, right? And what happens is this entire front office then just looks to pick up players that fit exactly what Jurgen Klopp wants. And Klopp will give his input, but he doesn't have he's not the one making the decisions. He's not the one doing the work. You just have a very good harmony between the tactical side, the coaching side, and the people going out and using numbers and analysis and stuff to match that, right? Which is why you have players like Sadio Mane, right? Who comes in and we all think he's good, but did we think he was a world-class right winger? I didn't think, at least. I don't know how you guys felt. I actually was really surprised when he played this well. Diego Jota, who's had injury troubles, which is unfortunate, but looked like he hit another level at Liverpool. And all of this is because they perfectly match what Klopp wants, right? All of these signings, right? Like the Thiago signing, I don't know how the people in the comments feel about it, but I think it's largely been misfortune and injuries, and it's just been a bad situation for Liverpool at this season, right? And Thiago has appeared not to work out, but I think once you get those center backs back, it's going to look like a really good signing, right? Like that type of harmony, it exists, and they have a clear sporting director structure. Can it happen at Real Madrid? I don't know, but it does work at big clubs. I think it is the way forward. I think it is the future. But Real Madrid, Barcelona, I don't know if they'll ever get there, right? Because there's just something different about the institutions and culture. Barcelona actually has an excellent analytics department that they literally do not use at all, right? Like when Ernesto Valverde was there, someone asked him about it. He's like, "Yeah, we don't pay attention to them."
Yeah, I talked to a data executive who works with like Juventus and Bayer Leverkusen, like different clubs, and he literally told me Barcelona has the best in the world that they don't use at all. He's like, if Barcelona used it, they wouldn't have signed Griezmann, but they never use their data analytics, and they have the best in the world.
So I mean that all of that is a good counter, right? To this idea of not having sporting director at a club like Real Madrid. The other thing you avoid if you have a sporting director is that you at least have some continuity in the identity of the team, in that you avoid situations where you go from Zidane to Lopetegui to Solari back to Zidane, because Lopetegui plays this possession-based crossing scheme with false nine and, you know, certain players thriving. Then Solari comes in. Solari promotes the whole entire youth system. Then Zidane comes in and says, "Nah, I don't need these guys." And so you're shuffling through all these identities within the small time frame. And that's, you know, Monchi, part of the reason why he's so important at Sevilla is because he needs to make sure that all of his managers follow a certain type of identity, right? So that there's continuity with the players from it transitions a little bit easier. The other thing is, I think you have to also weigh the future of the team with managers, and whether we like it or not, no matter how patient you want to be, managers are transitory, right? Even Zidane, who is the exception of the rule, can wake up one day and say, "I'm tired, I'm leaving." And all of a sudden, so like you're in a situation, let's say if you really believe that Odegaard is the future, he can be one of the great talents in the world, one of the leaders, one of the best players in the world. He and Fedic, for example, can lead your midfield for the next half decade. Let's say if you really believe that, and then Zidane says, "I don't want him in my team." And you trust Zidane for that. And then a few months later in the summer, Zidane resigns. And now you've lost Zidane and Odegaard. So that's when it becomes tricky, and losing out on talent like that because you put your trust in a manager, which you rightfully do. I mean, we've always said that it's important to trust your manager, right? But what happens in that situation? You miss out on the player and the manager. And that's a really tough spot to be in. And sometimes I feel like that's where we might be with, like, when Achraf and Reguilon say, "We never got a call from Zidane, we wanted to come back," when Llorente never got a chance. You get my point. I don't want to harp on this too much, but you get my point, right?
Yeah, and I think the other thing to look at too is just, I think it's easy to forget this, but just like kind of the business or financial aspect to this, like bringing back, especially in the current environment, and Florentino's gone on and on about how the pandemic's going to kill all these clubs. And so given the current environment, does it make sense? You need midfield depth, right? So does it make sense to sell Odegaard, and let's say you get 40-50 million for him? And does it make sense to sell Odegaard, and then you have to then splash that cash out again to just bring in someone else to replace him, who then is you're going to have to lay those payments out plus that salary on a however many year basis. So if it's a 5-year, 6-year contract, you have to split those payments up over 5 years and 6 years. When with Odegaard, his cost had already been unamortized. It was like, he cost us like $3 million when he was like 16 years old. So he's essentially free. He's essentially not adding anything to your books you need that midfield depth. So it just doesn't make sense to sell him. It makes zero sense business perspective to sell him. So